Welcome to another episode of the Digital Insight Podcast, where today we ask, what can CTOs learn from Team GB and their Olympic gold medal winning cyclist team when it comes to implementing automation as part of a digital transformation journey? Joining me to answer this question today is Terry Daniell, Operations Director at Trenchers Law.
Yeah, so I'm Terry Daniell. I'm the Operations Director at Trenchers Law. I've been working in telecoms industry for more years than I care to remember or share, to be honest. But it's throughout all of my career, so predominantly BT and for Virgin Media. About 3.5 years ago, actually, we set up Trenchers Law with my partner Sharon, and our objective was really to not be a typical law firm and to change the game in terms of way leave and supporting Boris's digital roadmap to hopefully 100% digital take up in the UK. So yeah, that's kind of me and what we do. The past year I've spent working on a transformation project within our team to try and speed up the acquisition of wayleaves. And for those who don't know what a wayleave is, so a wayleave is a legal agreement between typically an operator, so a broadband provider, and the owner of property. So it might be a block of flats, it might be a private road, it might be a pole in somebody's front garden. So that's me and what I do.
No, fantastic. And first things that jump out there then, and we'll go into this a bit more detail as we go on, but you mentioned, for example, BT, so telecom. We also mentioned law, the legal side of it. We also mentioned a digital roadmap. Sort of three key things that we kind of cover a lot of on this podcast and in our magazines. And one of the things we talk about, so you talked about transformation there, when we look at that kind of technical roadmap, as it were, you talked about sort of getting basically, a big thing we discuss with people is their journeys to automating and digitalizing their systems and putting all sort of bits in place, tools and technology to sort of move from a kind of a paper environment, as it were, to a more automated, technical paperless environment. From your perspective then, and obviously not just this last year, but just through your work with the people that you've worked with, kind of looking at automation, looking at kind of technical maturity, looking at the sort of journeys of the people that you talk to and the things that you deal with, what are you seeing in terms of just where we are, where your customers are, where you are in terms of their digital transformation journeys, their maturity towards automation, just how widely and broadly it's being adopted and how successfully it is being adopted?
Within our sector, I would say not very well, to be brutally honest. And I think part of that is there's some big players in our space, and I've worked for two of them. So changing organisations of that size and scale, take a lot of time, take a lot of money, and also take a lot of. It's very difficult to get buying across the piece, and there's also some sunk cost, usually material sunk cost, that people are reluctant to kind of throw away. We're in a really strong position because we're a young and relatively small company, although growing almost by the day. So we were in a strong position to kind of get on that journey and get on it quickly. But I think where we've managed to, it's not an all or nothing approach. We've just tried to chip away at little bits and pieces that we do in our process, and automate those, and then make sure that they, connect together. So it's bite-sized chunks, so you can get a relatively quick win, which helps people to buy into the process. So one of the very early ones, the world that we work in is very data rich. It's very old fashioned. So the land registry is the number one source of data that we use. 50% of the data on corporate ownership on the land registry is wrong. So we were chasing our tails. There's no email addresses stored on there, so everything's in written format. So I was forever spending it's felt like thousands of pounds on ink cartridges for our printer. We had a person that was almost permanently in a queue at a post office dropping off sackfuls of letters. So the third thing was, let's get a mailing house. Let's automate some of that. Let's get some, we were doing mail merges, but let's get a bit more structure around that. And then immediately you can see, the cost benefit, but a time benefit, and people are actually enjoying their work day because they're actually making a contribution, not doing a mail merge and folding bits of paper and licking stamps. No one actually did lick stamps, but that's a phrase that I use is, we're not employing people to lick stamps. And then once we've got the buy-in of one thing, and then that leads on to another, and then another, and then you get some momentum, and people start to see the benefits. And now we're in a position where probably 80% of the stuff that our people were doing previously, we no longer do, or people no longer do it. A robot does it, or a system does it. And that has, vast number of benefits. There's no longer a direct correlation between revenue and cost. So that has huge benefits. But also, we're highly focused on what we do, what work. There's no right and wrong way of doing what we do. So we try something. If it works, we know that it works, and we keep doing it, and we do it more often. But if it fails, we embrace the fact that it's failed, and we learn from that, and we try not to do it again. So it's been an eye-opening process, and so far, touch veneer, it's going well.
And you mentioned already there, it's quite clear what the benefits have been. It's very, it almost seems like a no-brainer. Like, of course you're going down this route. Of course you're automating because, well, look what it's enabling now. Look what it's been able to allow you to focus resources more focused in different areas of value and that sort of thing. But when I talk to a lot of people about digital transformation, or I talk to a lot of people about their automation journeys, I ask them why. Why do you want to do it? And it's no it's quite common that if you read between the lines, some people are kind of starting their automation journeys, or they're looking to sort of like you said, it's not a catch-all. It's not going to, you have to do it in these small chunks. Some people want everything straight away. And when you sort of drill down into it, that means that they're falling victim to a trend. They're seeing competitors are automating. They're seeing the world around them automating, and they're just needing to catch up without really understanding why and what they're going to get from it. And that can lead to sort of, the conversations where people are just sort of saying, well, we need to be talking about automation. And then they say, why? They say, because we just need to. How important is it then? And I guess the answer is very obviously, how important is it that when, like you've said, you've kind of took this bite-sized approach, that you are looking at it with a business case almost at every step of the way, so that you're not just, you're not starting with a tech and looking for a problem or a solution. You're starting with, this is what we need to change, and then you're looking to apply the tech to it.
Yeah, it's critical, and I think the benefit that we've had as a smaller organisation is we're closer to the problems. I'm a great fan of the back to the floor mentality, because the people who are actually doing the stuff and doing the do know what the problems are. And again, in a big organisation, you can get so far removed from that you just carry on doing the same thing, and there's people at the sharp end are feeling the pain. So what we've done is really look under the bonnet as to what are people doing, why are they doing it, how easy is it to do, how often are we getting it wrong because somebody's cut and pasting information out of one system into another system, and addresses are getting cut off, so letters are getting returned to sender because nobody intentionally makes that mistake, but this stuff happens. Or we're not checking company's house and something hasn't been changed correctly, and we've got under the bonnet, but that is time consuming, and that has been the biggest eye opener. That takes determination and drive and perseverance, because there is no quick win in this stuff. If you've got to do it properly, and I've seen in some of my customers' organizations where they have bought an automated product to fix a problem, and what they've done is created a different problem. Quite luckily for me, we have a solution to that second problem, so we're going to feel the benefit. But and it's the example I'm thinking about is around planning. So there's some quite sophisticated tools on the market that will do network planning, but in the old way of doing it, somebody would walk the route, somebody would have a look. Oh, that looks like a problem delivery. That's a private road. And by removing that, they're saving up problems for downstream. And I think that is one danger of the drive to automation. Unless you fully understand the end-to-end process, something's going to get missed, and that is going to cost you more than you're saving.
And following on from that, then, sort of, what do you think are some of the kind of biggest misconceptions? So, for example, earlier on, you talked about how once upon a time, a task was being completed by a person, and now there's a tool in place to automate that task, which frees up that person to do something else, a bit more value added somewhere else. But AI automation isn't new, and some of the kind of cliched fears that people have always seemed to have had around you bringing in something to automate services or systems is that it removes people, that they're not going to have any jobs because you've got something that's much smarter doing it for them and that sort of thing. We know that's not true. However, people are still going to have misconceptions even to this day, even as far as advanced as we are with that kind of automation journey. Kind of, again, based on kind of things you've seen and even your own experiences, what are sort of some of the misconceptions that you are witnessing organizations sort of still possessing when it comes to automation?
People are reluctant to change, and some people are more reluctant than others. So you have to quite quickly be able to demonstrate and articulate the benefits. Back in the Industrial Revolution, people were burning down mills because there was a perception that everybody was going to get made redundant by the loom or whatever it might have been at the time. So, but if you can demonstrate to people the benefits and take them on that journey, I think they'll embrace it. And we've got a couple of examples. We've got a couple of individuals who like doing the same thing regularly, and it's taken a little while, but we've taken them with us, and they're now at the point of saying, actually, I want to give that a go. I'd like to do this. I'd like to, and it's quite refreshing and eye-opening to see that change in people, because I love change. I like doing things differently. I take that on board, but I do appreciate that. I'm probably rarer than most. There's a lot of people that just want to do the same job. They want to come in at 9 o'clock in the morning. They want to do exactly the same today as they did yesterday, and I want to go home at 5. And you have to accept that that's human nature. There are people with that mindset.
And you've already sort of mentioned kind of the time involved. You said the time it takes to sort of has been quite eye-opening. You've already talked about kind of a cultural change there, that some people are very happy. Things have worked very successfully in a certain way for a certain amount of time. Why change? What's the point in changing if it's already proving to success? They're kind of some very common hurdles, as it were, and obstacles to implementing change and automation. But what others do you see? Is it just those, or I know cost is also one that people will put people off, but sort of speaking broadly first of all, and then we'll look at kind of the difference between like a larger organization and a smaller one. But yeah, what kind of other things are you seeing that are truly preventing people to be further down the automation kind of conversation?
I think cost is definitely, and the scale, and also as an owner of an organization, I'm in this for the long term. So, and I think people's career paths are quite, the amount of time people spend in a role, seems to be reducing year on year. So I think people are reluctant to commit to a longer term project, because I'm going to stay here for 2 years, 3 years, and I'm going to go up the next rung on the ladder, and I'm going to move on, and I'm going to get a bigger salary. It's, I'm fortunate I'm not in that position, because I 50% owner of the company, so I'm committing the long term. So I think that is a big hurdle. And also in big organizations, it's about the empowerment of the people that are doing it. I mentioned it before, the back to the floor concept. That I've worked in big organizations where there's some bizarre behaviors, and you try and challenge them, and you just get lost in the noise. So it's empowering people, that mindset, and I do think that's, you know, back to the reference about GB cycling. You know, there was fantastic support in place, and there was, you know, some of the greatest coaches in the world, some of the greatest equipment, but ultimately it came down to the riders, and the riders have to take responsibility for what they are going to deliver, which ultimately is winning a cycle race. And it's about putting the mechanisms and the processes and the support in place to drive that. And that's what hopefully we do at Trenches, about putting things in place so that the people that are going out negotiating with freeholders, or, you know, having the telephone conversations with housing associations or building developers, they feel empowered. They've got the tools at their fingertips that they can be as effective as you possibly can.
No, and I completely agree. And having spoken to various different organizations of different sizes, big organizations, smaller ones, it's such a common thread, and you can kind of see almost the frustrations that the bigger organizations have, because the person I'll be speaking to will be saying exactly that. It's about the people. They want to be able to equip the people with the right skill set, the right tools, but because they're in a bigger organization, they come across different sort of closed doors, as it will. So with that in mind, then, kind of looking at it as we'll sort of frame it as a, you know, incumbent versus a smaller company. Is it easier then to take, I don't want to say it's risky to take these automation journeys, but obviously there is an element of risk involved. Things can go wrong, things can cost a bit too much, that sort of thing. They can take time, and, you know, they might not work out right in the end. Is it easier then to be a smaller company to sort of take these journeys than it would be to be a bigger one that's got bigger resources?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's easier. I think it's just different. So, you know, we're a small organization. I think we're currently at 25 people. You know, a year ago we were at, you know, 12 or 13. Taking me out of the business has a material impact on our efficiency, whereas a big organization can absorb that. But and also, you know, if we get it wrong in a small organization, you know, it could be disastrous for us. So I don't think it's necessarily easier or more difficult. It's just different, different challenges.
Yeah. And so one thing then, you know, of course, it's key to obviously what you do, but it's key to kind of most automation conversations. It all revolves around data. Most of them, it's often just sort of, we're automating a process. So, for example, if I'm speaking to a CTO or I'm speaking to a CPO in the procurement space, they're looking at kind of capturing data more accurately, more effectively, being able to understand it, being able to use it to, you know, improve a decision later down the line, or that kind of thing, you know, generate efficiencies. But is that kind of I don't want to say narrow, because obviously that's a very clear benefit and clear use case for automation, but is it sort of limiting the view of it if to only associate it with data? Can automation also be used to unlock other areas of innovation or opportunity for a business?
So I think, you know, data is critical. So that is critical, but it also, if you've got that certainty around and repeatability, it frees, once you've got it cracked, it frees you up. So you've got more headspace to think about the other things, and you can, you know, the prime example that I use is our biggest customer. We getting the bill out every month was a monumental task. You know, we had, you know, 2 or 3 people working on it for a couple of days just to get a bill out. And now that happens. I just push a button and it works. You know, the reporting that I do with my customers, again, that was probably, you know, a whole day's work for somebody to build the reporting pack to get the data. Then it's another day to do the interpretation of that data and what are our recommendations. You know, and we're doing this on a monthly basis. And so somebody's probably spending a week every month per customer doing stuff that now, you know, we do it the night before, we print it out, I check it, and we have a valuable conversation. So that week of time is spent having a conversation about how we improve things, not let's just get the data.
Yeah.
So data is critical, but having that data, it's what you can do with it and then what it frees you up to do. And you know, not necessarily what is just going well, it's what's going wrong. So yeah, and it's, fail fast is a phrase I hear a lot, but it's, we'll try. So I hate to use the word failure, but it's try it. If it works, do it again. If it doesn't work, move on.
Yeah.
Do something different.
No, absolutely. And one thing you said right at the very start, when I asked you about like sort of what the general conversation is, you said in your particular industry, perhaps not as advanced as it should be when compared to other industry spaces. So specifically looking at your, the industry space you work in, then why? What's kind of, what do you think is going to be key to really kind of propelling that conversation forward? So it's not just say one or two companies like yourself being at a more mature stage of automation, but it's kind of more broadly, advancing at quite a pace.
Well, I think the underlying driver is going to be competition. So yeah, the amount of investment that's going into technology, telecoms, broadband specifically, is vast. The numbers are staggering, and that is affecting the incumbents and the bigger players. So we're having conversations with the big players, and they are waking up to the threat of the smaller, more nimble, more agile broadband providers. So that's forcing their thinking. They're not yet at the decision and taking action yet, but they're definitely awake and thinking about it. But I do think there's a huge opportunity for interoperability. Some of the challenges, we've disrupted this space. We launched our automation in September. We were overwhelmed by the level of response that we got. But everybody's, yes, we want to take advantage. We see the benefit. We want to do this. And then we have a conversation that said, well, actually, if you could just work with these 16 systems that we've got, and I have to have that frank conversation that you've approached us because you want to benefit from these things. You can't do both. You can't hamstring us with 16 different systems, because we're going to just be doing the same as you've always done. And it's a fool that does the same thing over and over and again and expects a different outcome.
Yeah. And you use a good turn of phrase there about sort of, you described how the incumbents, you've had a conversation with incumbents, they're waking up to the small organizations doing more, being more nimble. Again, that's something that I hear a lot, not just in this industry, but in many industries, about how, the kind of traditional zooming out a little bit and looking at, you've got your incumbents who, your top companies that define and dictate, as it were, the industry, smaller startups that are a bit more disruptive. However, it's always going to remain the same status quo. But obviously over the last 5 or 6, maybe even 10 years, I feel like there's been, I've seen anyway, when I've spoken to people, kind of a perspective, a shift in perspective, where no longer now are the incumbents sort of leading the pack. Well, they are from a financial perspective, of course, and capital. They're leading it from that perspective. However, when it comes to innovation or disruption, they're where they are, and they're not really pushing anything more. And actual fact, the real people who are changing the industry are those smaller organizations, those disruptors, more than ever before. When you say they're waking up as well, do you think there'll ever be a point where, no incumbent's ever going to kind of just disappear and it's just going to be left a marketplace full of small organizations? But do you think the kind of the scales are going to shift a little, even more so that it's going to become more of a level playing field, just from a pure innovation disruption perspective, not from capital, because I don't think you're ever going to impact that sort of capital of the top companies, if that makes sense? That's quite a rambling question.
Yes. No, I think the momentum is definitely with the disruptors, and I think that can only be positive. And I also think, we've all had a pretty awful last year in terms of lockdowns and COVID, but I think that is forcing people to think differently. We've had we haven't got huge, great, chrome and glass tower blocks for our people, but if we did, we quite quickly wouldn't have. And I think some of the steps that we put in the very early days about cloud-based services, IP-based telephony systems, all of those things, we transitioned over a weekend, from having everybody in the office to everybody being at home, and we pretty much didn't miss a heartbeat. It worked seamlessly. But I think we were in the rarities. I think that, the bigger the organisation, the more difficult that is, primarily from a cost perspective. So I do think the incumbents are going to steal a march, and the disruptors are going to steal a march on the incumbents, and they're going to be forced. They have to wake up and reinvent what they're doing.
So final two questions for you then. One of which you've already mentioned it, but it'll be a nice kind of one line that we can, if one sort of key takeaway, which will be about the Team GB cycling sort of analogy, but we'll ask that one in a second. One thing you mentioned, obviously, the last year. Now, we're not going to sort of say, tell me what's happened over the last year, or anything like that, because we've seen it, we're still experiencing it. But one key thing that I've found is a lot of people, a lot of organizations and industries have found that plans that they may have had for automation, digitization, digital transformation have been brought forward. They are now being propelled 2-3 years in the future, as it were, because they were sort of in a non-COVID world. They would have been kind of, yeah, we'll do automation in 5 years. But because of COVID, they've had to bring that a lot closer. They've had to get there quicker, which is presenting an interesting challenge of, well, now you're there in a much quicker rate. What do you do now? Is that something, you think, is that a challenge that you think many are going to be facing, where they've got to a point where they would have been a lot quicker than usual, and now they're kind of faced with, well, now what do we do?
I've not really thought about that, but I think the challenge is then, how do they adapt and become more nimble? So I think, we've gone from one environment to a completely different environment, and I suspect we're going to morph into a hybrid of the both. So I think, the people that are going to be successful are the people that are going to embrace that change, and they'll come out on top.
Final question then, and I know you've written an article about this, which we're going to be featuring in our magazine, but if you just give one kind of key takeaway then, what do you think CTOs, when it comes to implementation, let me start that one again. When it comes to implementing automation projects, what do you think CTOs can learn from Team GB cycling?
I think it's the relentless focus on improvement in every single thing you do, and it doesn't necessarily have to be big, shiny, fantastic, cost a fortune. If you're focused on the outcomes and you've got determination, and the bit that springs to mind is Team GB track racing. They know they've broken the world record in training. They know what they need to do, and the technology they used was a rolled up towel on the side of the track, and the coach, Shane Sutton, would either stand in front of it or behind it based upon how they, a towel and a guy standing has changed the outcome of that race. So you don't have to spend a fortune. You don't have to spend an age on it. You can make very, very small, simple changes that bring a fantastic outcome.